DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. DogWorks Radio Network presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Make sure you check us out on social media at Dogworks Radio, and be sure you hit that subscribe button anywhere you're listening to this podcast. And today we have a special guest joining us. He's calling in from Norway. His name is Barry Siragusa, and he is the secretary for Mush with P.R.I.D.E. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But before that, Barry, can you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you're all about, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. As you said, my name is Barry Siragusa. I've lived in Norway for the last 11 years, but I'm originally an American. Grew up in Maine, started running dogs there. I've been running dogs ever since. That was in 1998 or something like that, I think, 97, 98. I've been running dogs since then, married a Norwegian, and have 2 kids and a kennel of sled dogs out here.
So, Barry, my first question right off the bat is, what was the learning curve from being an American and moving over to another country? What did you have to face with language and culture and that sort of stuff? Was it an easy transition for you?
You know, I'd like to say that it definitely was. It wasn't. It was. There were some challenges that I had not expected. The things that I expected to be difficult ended up not being difficult. I expected the language to be a challenge, and I expected there to be a little bit of a culture shock once I got over here. And I found that was actually not the case at all, especially coming over here as a musher. There's such a good community of dog mushers over here, and 99% of Norwegians speak conversational English. So it was that was really no issue. But just getting used to being so far away from everything I guess everyone that I knew, that was a challenge. And then sort of rebuilding my kennel. When I came over, I sold most of my dogs in the States, and then rebuilt once I got over here, and that was also a challenge. The dogs I found were quite different.
The language of sled dogs is typically universal, and it's usually a welcoming community, and I'm sure you found that over there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I found everybody to be really welcoming. I find that the Norwegians have fewer of the platitudes than I was used to growing up in New England, where people would say, "Oh, it's nice to see you. Oh, I hope you have a wonderful day," things like that. Norwegians don't do a lot of that as a sort of conversational filler, but I find them to be very honest, hardworking, real people. So I've enjoyed my time here.
That's awesome, and I'm sure you have great opportunities to run dogs up there. Do you do much racing, or are you more of a tour or expedition leader or something like that?
I don't do a lot of racing. I used to guide quite a bit, but don't do much of that anymore either. For me, this has been a lifestyle for such a long time that I kind of can't imagine life without the dogs at this point. I've got 2 small children now. One of them's 7, one of them's 4, and they're getting into it now. So now I'm kind of playing the part of the dad, the teacher, getting them into the sport. They're getting into it, and we're doing it kind of as a family. So it's gone a little bit over into the recreational realm, which is at this stage in our life totally okay.
totally okay. And of course, I think probably most of the people that listen to our show are recreational mushers, and they understand that side of it, and that's how they get out and enjoy their dogs. And of course, that's a very good way to enjoy the sport of mushing for sure. So Barry, you had mentioned at the top, or I guess I mentioned at the top, that you are the secretary for Mush with Pride, and that's an organization that is doing a lot of great things. It really just kicked off again in the last couple of years. It was sort of dormant for a decade or so, but now you guys are rocking and rolling again, and they had a board election, and you were one of the folks that was voted in, and you're the current secretary. Before we talk about your duties, can you kind of give our listeners an outline of what Mush with Pride is and some of the things that you guys are attempting to get started, kicking the year off right?
Mush with Pride was created in the 90s, and it was created as an organization where knowledge around what we do as mushers could be gathered, and then actually where we created a system, or they created a system for making that information available. That is ultimately what we are trying to do now as well. We have our guidelines. There's been a lot of talk about our guidelines, with P.R.I.D.E making it a mandatory part of the signups, that the mushers need to be members of Mush with Pride and have their kennels inspected along the guidelines that we have that are in place. As you said, the Mush with Pride lay dormant for about 10 years. What we're trying to do now is to update those guidelines and also kind of get back into the public eye a little bit. What we want to avoid is anybody getting the wrong impression of who we are or what we're doing. We're not a governing body. We have no interest in becoming a governing body.
If we could jump into, you had mentioned the Iditarod and being members of Mush with Pride and their new kennel guidelines that they're attempting to enforce. The last couple of years now, they're following the guidelines that you guys have set up. And if I remember, I joined Mush with Pride when I started mushing in the early 90s or so, and I remember receiving that packet, and that was well before email and internet and all that, and I thought, wow, this is great stuff. This is exactly kind of an outline of how a sled dog kennel should be developed and how the dog should be housed and all that. And that's sort of the take that they're using with Iditarod now, is sort of those basic principles to instill good kennel management and husbandry and all of that. And I think that's one of your underlying missions or goals and objectives, is to make sure there's some uniformity in how sled dogs are operated, not only in this country but everywhere else. Is that right?
Certainly, to a degree. We would like to see, obviously, as much uniformity as possible, but we also are very aware of the fact that that's hard to achieve when you're talking about dog mushers. We're all so different. If you ask a dog musher, a question, you're going to get as many different answers as there are dog mushers. But, also we realize that there's a big difference between what's feasible for a recreational musher in Maine or Colorado or California compared to a big tour operator or compared to somebody who lives in interior Alaska. We realize that we can't have guidelines that are going to be too concrete, because then it becomes something that works in Maine is not necessarily going to work here in Norway or in interior Alaska. So while we would like uniformity, at the same time, a lot of the guidelines, as you read through them, and what we're also trying to preserve as we go through the guidelines now, is just common sense. A lot of what we're preaching here is just common sense dog care. Yeah. And that's ultimately what we would like to get across here, is that there are many different ways to do things, and there are many great ways to do things, but there's also many bad ways to do things. And maybe just give people the information that they need to be able to, adequately assess whether they're doing things the right way for them and their dogs.
That's a great starting point for sure, because you had mentioned there are so many different types of kennels, everything from, the mom and pop that may have 2 or 3 dogs in the backyard, all the way up to, dog kennels, tour operations on glaciers and things that may have 60 or 70 dogs. And then, of course, folks that are off the road system, whether they're in interior Alaska or whatever. So, Barry, can you, for folks that are listening that this may be the first time hearing this, can you give us sort of an outline of what you would tell a new musher? Say somebody's calling you guys up and they're saying, I want to get involved with dog mushing. Can you kind of give them an overview of what to expect? I know that's a broad topic to breach here on the show, but just can you give them kind of a bullet point list of this? These are some of the things that I would recommend. Can you do that for them?
Absolutely. That can be a tough hoe to row, but row to hoe. Sorry. I think what I would recommend that people do is talk to somebody who is doing what you ultimately would like to be doing. Not necessarily if you've never run dogs before, go and talk to somebody who's won Iditarod because you would ultimately like to run Iditarod. Definitely go and do that. But talk to somebody who's doing what you would like to be doing within the lifetime of your first dog, put it that way. If somebody wants to get into middle distance racing, go and visit some middle distance people, go to races, talk to people who have dogs that look healthy, that come in looking good, that make you. Sometimes it just comes down to a gut feeling. That dog musher and that dog team that just gives you a good gut feeling. Go and talk to that person. Gain as much knowledge as you can firsthand. There's so many wonderful books and things out there, but you really just can't. Nothing beats hands-on experience and learning. In my opinion.
I agree with you for sure. And there are so many kennels out there that do promote good dog care. And as you mentioned, there are so many different ways. I'm thinking off the bat about the new ways that the Seavies are doing it here in South Central Alaska they have cabins for their dogs and free running pens and all this. And of course, other people are still using tethers and or not still using. That's sort of the predominant way of housing sled dogs are on the swivels and the tethers. And then of course you have folks that have, as we mentioned, 4 or 5 dogs and they have kennels in their garage, and that's a very acceptable way of doing things. And like you said, it's very difficult to paint with such a broad brush on how everything should be done. Absolutely. At least in terms of kennel management. Barry, what are some of the other issues that you guys are trying to tackle? I know that the management portion is a big one, but I'm sure awareness is another one, just making sure that people understand what the sport is and, sort of the lifestyle of a dog of a dog kennel and mushing and that sort of thing. What else is sort of on your plate?
We need to be aware that we're not just talking internally as a community anymore. When we put things out on social media, when things become as public as they have, we need to be aware of what we're saying and what we're doing and how that's going to look to people. It's important for us that we educate not just newer dog mushers, but even dog mushers that maybe have been in the sport for a little while, on maybe getting them to think a little bit differently about what they post on Facebook, or at least put themselves in somebody else's shoes who doesn't understand what we do and why we do it. And how is this going to look to somebody who's taking it out of context and who doesn't understand what we're doing? So a big part of what we're looking at now is education, both within the community, but also outside of the community, trying to counteract some of the stereotypes about dog mushing and dog mushers that are still hanging on. This sort of Sergeant Preston, caribou gut whip perception of dog mushers that is just not accurate. People, your average, somebody who's not a dog musher, when they think of a dog musher, is not going to think of somebody like Dee Dee Genre,
Right.
They're going to think of a big bearded dude, most likely, is what they're going to think of off the top of their head. So what we would like to see is the people who are doing things correctly, who are wonderful ambassadors for our sport, we'd love to see them get a little bit more recognition for that. You know, it's so easy, especially in the media. It's so easy to, it's the people that, where things go wrong, that's what you hear about.
Right.
You hear about the unfortunate events on the trail. You hear about people whose races didn't go well. You don't necessarily hear as much about the people who have done everything right by their teams throughout the entire year. And that's something that we would like to see change a little bit. So we're putting a lot of effort into public relations, specifically geared towards social media and how, you know, hopefully eventually maybe start to change, or not start to, continue to change public perception of what dog mushers do. There's so many wonderful dog mushers that are doing such a good job with that already as ambassadors for the sport, but we would like to see them, we'd like to help, I guess is the best way to put it.
And that's a great way to put it. And I've said all along here, and as I mentioned, I've been doing this for about 24, 25 years now. It's interesting how social media has come onto the scene, and and I say here on the show all the time, Facebook is really a blessing and a curse for dog mushing because of what you just said. It promotes a lot of good, but there's of course a lot of backlash as well. And I think that's realistic in any sport, especially when you're dealing with social media. You know, even if you're an avid football fan and your favorite team is the New England Patriots, you can hear as much positive stories on Facebook or Twitter or whatever about the team, but you can also delve a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole and find out as much dirt as you possibly want about the team as well. So it's definitely a tough journey to attack when you have so much information going on at once. It's tough to corral, isn't it?
It is. It is absolutely. And but in the same way, as you say, it's a blessing and a curse. It was interesting here, just to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from. Part of the reason I wanted to be involved in Mush with Pride is that here in Norway, when I first arrived, there were some rough races. There was a couple of years in a row where a couple of the races, they had some fairly cold weather, very hard trails, but fairly cold weather. And, some dogs really struggled during those races and weren't necessarily, it was very few mushers, but there were, it was sort of the bad apple sour the whole bunch. It ended up being this thing where it was, because of social media, it was very obvious that these dogs were not being optimally cared for. When the public started to react to this, the community's reaction, and I'm sure that I was guilty of this as well, was, you weren't there, mind your own business. What ended up happening was that it ended up getting to the point where an outside entity had to come in, or chose to come in, and start to police the races. And this outside entity, this is Mattilsynet. It's the I guess you could say it's sort of the SPCA equivalent. Came in and started changing the rules of the races for the benefits of the dogs, or what they thought was the benefit of the dogs. And it's been a very painful and long process for both the people working for Mattilsynet and the dog mushers to sort of start to get on the same page about what it is we're actually doing and what is realistic to expect during a dog race, and what's realistic to, where is the line? We had to kind of all meet in the middle, and that was a very painful process here. I would love to see us avoid that process in other parts of our community, where maybe as dog mushers, we can actually avoid this long process of educating people who are now making the rules, who don't know what we're about, who don't know what we're doing, who don't realize that the absolute majority of us are willing to move mountains and really do whatever it takes to take good care of our dogs.
That's a great point that you made there, Barry, about other people coming in and trying to change things or adapt things. There's so much. If we're just going to stick on the social media front for just a second, there's so much publicity about a couple of events in dog mushing, in particular the Iditarod or the Yukon Quest, and I think most people think that that's all dog mushing is about, are these ultra marathons on the trail of 1,000 miles or so out on the trail, and that's not what most of mushing is about. Most of it is much shorter distances, and then I remember asking you at the top there, are you a rec musher, are you expedition or a tour or whatever? Because there's so many different types. Most of the public's perception is really focused just on those two races, isn't it?
It really is. It really is, and that's both really positive and really negative. It makes it so that I've felt this way myself throughout having to sort of feeling almost the need to defend myself when people have asked questions about somebody who's had a particularly tough, let's use Iditarod, for example. If a musher has a particularly tough Iditarod and ends up in the media, I've had to answer some questions about, well, why do you mushers do stuff like this? It's very easy to paint with a very broad brush, and I think that that's an aspect of the sport that we need to adapt to.
Right.
And I think that it's an important part. It's an important part of what we can do at Mush with Pride is to actually show people that we're not all running Iditarod. Even if the absolute majority of the people running Iditarod are doing a fantastic job and taking excellent care of their dogs, it's, as you say, if you look at it in the total number of teams, it's a very, very small percentage of the total number of dog mushers who ever run Iditarod. We would like everybody to kind of have an organization where they can go and get information, or they feel an organization that has their back a little bit. While at the same time, I believe that it's important that we stand together as a community. Even if that's a painful process, even if that means that we as a community need to stand together and say, hey, we can actually do a little bit better than we have done. And at the moment, I don't see that is the direction we need to go. But I think that if we can have, as we work through these guidelines, as we revise, as we continue to have a dialogue with dog mushers from all walks of life in all areas of the world, that we slowly build a get to a common sense agreement on what we as a community think is okay before we lose the chance to decide that ourselves.
Yeah, I think that, again, I think that's a good point there that you bring up about having that community involvement. I guess my next question for you, Barry, is going back to that new musher that is just getting involved with the sport, and they see your guys' organization, whether it be on Facebook or they hear about it from that musher that they went to speak with, that mentor relationship that they're building. What can they expect from you guys? I know that, as you mentioned, you're just starting back up again after about a decade or so of a hiatus. What can they expect from this community aside from just a bunch of guidelines and that sort of stuff? What can they expect from the community at large?
At this point, what we are working on is just kind of getting back on our feet after that 10-year hiatus. But ultimately, what we would like is we would like them to be able to expect that if they have a question, if they've got a concern, if they're getting unwanted attention from other organizations that don't understand what they're doing, that they have a place to turn and ask for help, ask for advice. What the whole heart of this organization is to support dog mushers and their dogs. We ultimately want to have as we're working on. I'm part of the education committee, so we're in the process of putting together. I wouldn't say a curriculum. That sounds a little too rigid, but at least resources for people getting into the sport. And I guess you would have. I guess I actually have to call it a curriculum, because we're trying to put together something where we can go to schools and trade shows and races and things like that, and actually have a little seminar or a booth or whatever, where people can come and ask the questions that they need to ask, that are maybe, they may find themselves in situations that nobody in their immediate area has found themselves in. And sometimes it's nice to be able to ask an organization like Mush with Pride.
So you sort of answered my next question, which is going to be, what is going to be the method of delivery of this? And you had said that you'll want to have seminars and booths at trade shows and that sort of thing. And going back to that social media aspect, where every bit of information is now instant. What is going to be the method of delivery of this? Is it going to be just kind of a packet of information with some resources, or do you want to attempt real dialogue, whether it's through social media discussions or outreach or what? How are you guys going to attempt to deliver this information to the masses, whether it be to the mushers themselves or the public at large?
Sure. All of the above, really. It's, we're going to continue sending out, when people sign up and become members, they're going to continue to get a patch. They're going to continue to get the guidelines and a membership packet with, the information that we have sent to people. That's all in the process of being updated and revised. But once you're a member, it doesn't just stop. It's not going to stop with the packet, and you're not going to need to be a member to get the information. We are putting together we are updating the website. We are creating a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group, but we are going to create a page, and the board of directors we're in the process of creating avenues for anybody who wants information or wants to talk to be able to get a hold of us, the actual board of directors, and know who they're talking to. They're not going to get a foreign email with Mush with Pride at the bottom. Mush with Pride will probably be there, but if I answer you, you're going to know that it's me. If the president answers you, you're going to know that it's him. We want to make sure that we are as open and available as possible, and that everything we do, we do it publicly. We don't have any secrets. We're not doing anything covertly. If there's anybody out there that is wondering what we're doing, I would encourage them, by all means, to contact any one of us, because we're happy to talk about it. We're enthusiastic. We're all feeling really good about revitalizing Mush with Pride. I think it's something that has the potential to be really positive if people use the opportunity to talk to us and communicate with us. And even if that is to tell us that, in this case, guys, I think you really messed up. We would like to hear that. We want the feedback, because maybe the person who thinks that we messed up is somebody who does dog mushing in a way that none of us have any experience in, and has a different perspective that is valuable to us. We want as many perspectives into this as possible to make the resources that we have and the educational material that we put out as all-encompassing as it's possible for it to be.
Again, I agree with you for sure. Barry, we have just a few minutes left here on the show, and I have a couple of more questions. My next question to you is, where do you see dog mushing going in the next 5 or 10 years? And as you mentioned here on the show, and I've said many times here on the podcast, our future is really dictated by a couple of different variables, and one of those, of course, is public perception. The other is the weather. Another is economy in the areas where mushing is popular. Where do you see the sport of mushing in the next 5 or 10 years?
That's a good question. It's something that it seems to be more and more the topic of conversation around the food cookers. Where are we going to end up in 5 years? I can't speak for anybody else, but my expectation is that we are going to continue to struggle a little bit with the public perception. There's always going to be people who are just, whether it's ignorance or willingly so, not understand what we're doing. I hope that doesn't have any real long-term negative consequences for us. I hope that it encourages us to grow and adapt. But ultimately, I would guess that the races will come under more and more scrutiny. I believe that the public will ultimately have more of a say in what we are allowed to do and what we do than ever before. And I hope that we're able to and what we need in order to do what we want to do, in order to run dogs, be out in wonderful parts of the world with our dogs, but at the same time do it in such a way that is acceptable to the people who take a few minutes to try and understand what we're doing.
I think you summed it up pretty well. To end the show here, Barry, how can folks find out more information about you and your kennel? And then secondly, how can folks find out more about Mush with Pride?
Well, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. If you just look up my name, Barry Siragusa, I'm going to pop up there. Mush with Pride, we are currently not on Instagram. We're working on that at the moment, but we are on the World Wide Web. Go to mushwithpride.org. Our website is there. It is up and going. There's going to be some changes over the next few months as we update the website a little bit, but it should always be available, and all of the information should be available there. And we are on Facebook, and all of the members of the board are also on Facebook. So really, any of those avenues are good ways to contact us. If you send an email, it's going to come directly to me. And if I can't answer your question, I will forward it to one of the other people on the board to get the questions answered. And the same with the Facebook page and the Facebook group. You'll come in contact with one of the members of the board, and we will always do our best to answer your questions or just talk to you or try and support you in any way that we can.
Excellent. Well, Barry, thank you very much for joining us today here on Mushing Radio, and we'll talk again soon, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of my guest today, Barry Siragusa, he is the secretary for Mush with Pride and also a dog musher living in Norway. This is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.